and gentlemen, please welcome international TV journalist Nik GOWING.
Veuillez souhaiter la bienvenue au journaliste international.
Well, as President WALESA said, it's good to see you all still here, and there's an important issue to pick up on now. In the next 40 minutes or so, it's going to be the last session of the day. You've had amazing endurance and stamina, and I'd like to invite the four participants up onto the platform, President WALESA, President PASTRANA, President Kufuor, and Mr. Lee. If you'd like to come up on the platform. And as they come up, I'm going to give you a short introduction, which is really picking up on what President Bongo said earlier, right at the beginning of his remarks, about the new challenges, the new threats, the new unthinkables, that speed of turbulence that we're seeing, the landscapes and the variables changing amazingly fast. But the question I'm going to put to the panelists is, how easy is it to rise to those issues that the president put on the agenda? Because he said that there have to be leaders who are prepared to take risks. We need to act, he said, listening very much to the next generation. There's a risk of mistakes, but we must make those mistakes. Let us dare to take risks together. And what we have on the platform is three former presidents and a very senior figure in the Chinese investment community who can help us understand the way risks are being handled now. There is no upward linear direction of progress and stability. In fact, one has to assume it's the opposite. That is a challenge. These are unthinkables for every leader, not just in Africa, but elsewhere. And what I'd like to do is encourage you to think of issues which you would like to raise with our guests here, our distinguished guests. And we need to understand the challenges that they think are now faced by presidents and how they, when they were in office, were able to handle it. We'll hear from Mr. Lee as well, who's the senior figure. He's the Vice Chairman, President and Chief Investment Officer for the China Investment Corporation, about how they are working out how emerging economies, like in this part of the world, are handling the new challenges in this very uncertain world, even if there are those like Mr. Barroso who remain optimistic. Let me introduce them one by one as I ask them for their first comments. Andrés Pastrana, who was President of Colombia from 1998 to 2002. And we have John Kufuor, who was President of Ghana for 8 years. And we have, again, Lech WALESA, who is President of Poland. I have to tell you that I was with Mr. WALESA in the shipyards in 1980. So we go back a long way, President WALESA, and it's great to see you here. But I'd like to ask you each about the challenges you face and you think presidents, prime ministers, governments are now facing when it comes to understanding the risks that President Bongo has put on the agenda. President Pastrana, you are running Colombia at a critical moment, both economically and with a subversion within the country.
Yes, thank you, Nick. As you said, Colombia, I was president from 1998 to 2002. The 7th of August of 1998, you remember that we had the Russian crisis. Colombia, at that time, we had unemployment close to 20%. Interest rates in Colombia were over 60%. Inflation over 21%. That was the banking system, and the cooperative system was almost broke. And on the other side, we had the problem of narco trafficking, the problem of guerrillas, and the problems of paramilitaries. So I think that it was really the worst moment in the history of Colombia, the day of my inauguration.
But this business of having to take risk.
So, take risk. First of all, and I think this is an issue that I want to point out here in Africa, because I think that's going to be the next step of the African leaders. taking risk, going after one of the most difficult subjects that they're going to have to deal, that it's narco-trafficking. Europe, it's through Africa, it's using Africa, Latin America to get the drug into Europe, so that's going to be one challenge. First of all, I propose a peace talks with the guerrilla. I went personally to the middles of the jungle of Colombia to meet the leaders of the FARC, and I proposed them to start a negotiation process to end 50 years of violence in Colombia. I went alone, and I remember in that first conversation with the leader of the FARC, with Manuel Marulanda, that I asked him, being president-elected of Colombia, I asked him, how many people do I have around here in the middles of the jungle of Colombia to talk with you? And he said, you were coming, Mr. President, I have 2,500 guerrillas around here to protect you. But that was the first attempt. We start conversations with the guerrilla, but on the other side, I start what I call Plan Colombia, that was a plan to strengthen our armed forces, police, our economy, social investment, alternative development, crops for the cocaine fields. And I was talking with the guerrilla, but on the other side, I was arming my army, and I strengthened my army as never in the history of Colombia. And on the other side, we have to deal with narco-trafficking. As you will know, we have the largest, or we used to have, the largest cartels of narco-traffickers in Colombia. We used to have the Cali cartel and the Medellin cartel. Those two cartels were exporting almost 80 to 90% of the drug to the world. Even I was a victim of narco-trafficking. When I was running for mayor of Bogota in 1988, I was kidnapped by Pablo Escobar, and I'm the only survivor of one of the kidnappings of Escobar. But since that time, and since I was a journalist also, I decided to go after drug lords and narco-trafficking. In my tenure, the only thing that narco-traffickings are afraid of was extradition. Extradition to the United States, because they knew that they will pay jail in the United States. The last president before myself, my predecessor, extradited one drug lord. In my tenure of 4 years, I extradited 130 of the drug lords in Colombia, and that was the first step to start cleaning what was happening with drug cartels and narco-trafficking.
But let me just press you.
Yes.
The issue of taking risk.
Yes.
And what President Bongo said, we must now move out of our comfort zones as leaders. Quickly, how did you feel when you were moving out of your comfort zone?
I feel very well, because that was the zone you should be. If you have one of the worst problems in the world, President Barroso says something that you have, and we have to be aware. If we don't have security in our countries, we don't have development. If we don't have security in our countries, it's going to be very difficult to get out of poverty, because we need foreign investment, we need to bring new resources, and if we don't have security, then we will not have development and growth. And that's why you have to take all the risk, even going to the middle of the jungle of Colombia, alone, to talk to the leader of the guerrilla movement, to ask them to go into a peace process. Unfortunately, at that time, we have to broke the peace process. Today, the new president of Colombia, it's going back again into a dialogue, into a political solution, and I hope that we could go forward, because I completely agree with President Barroso. I agree that if we have security in Colombia today, at least Colombia will grow 3 to 4 points every year.
Right, we've heard from President WALESA of what happened starting in 1980, and he became president. We'll come back to you a little later, President WALESA. Let me go to President Kufuor, then to Mr. Lee. You were in power for 8 years. The world was moving a lot slower in your 8 years compared to what it is now with public expectations. Your country, Ghana, where I'll be in a few weeks, is now a very well-connected country. But when you think back to the risks you had to take out of your comfort zone, what kind of advice would you be giving to those who are running emerging economies? Because that's what we're looking at in this session.
Well, the challenge should be for the deciders, as President Bongo called them. I would call them leaders, to carry their people with them. It might not be that easy, because where Your country is afflicted with unemployment on a mass scale, where university students, most of them come out of campuses without expectation of ready, gainful employment. And they are loitering in the streets and doing things that wouldn't be expected of them normally. You go as leader trying to advise them to desist. It takes a bit of effort to do. So how a leader would convince the youth to come along, to share his vision and the policies he would launch to convince them that in due course, if they would be patient, they would be well served. I believe this is the first thing, and it's not very easy. In my case, I was assuming office as the first civilian leader to have been elected. Till then, Ghana had been independent since '57. All changes had happened through coup d'etats. But in my case, in the year 2000, 2001, I had won an election, taking power from a military ruler who converted himself into a civilian ruler, and it wasn't easy. The economy had collapsed. President PASTRANA was telling us, recounting the collapsed economy he inherited, where inflation rate was over 40%, where lending rates in the banks were over 50%. Nothing was working. Within 1 year, 2000, our currency depreciated by over 100% against the American dollar. You can imagine. So you come in promising to usher in a golden age of business. Everybody looks up to you. How do you do it? And you have only a 4-year term of office. You need to convince the people that truly...
But we are now talking about a period of unthinkables. Here we are in a country which relies on oil even less than it was, but many countries are surprised by what's happening in the oil business. For example, this was unthinkable 15 months ago. What about the capacity of leaders now to handle these unthinkables, to handle the unexpected? Because very soon the public will be making judgments about them, and often negative judgments if they get those judgments wrong, because President Bongo said we've got to take risks.
Indeed.
We've got to get out of our comfort zone.
Well, he also talked about diversification of the economy, where you put all your eggs in one basket, like if they depended exclusively on oil, and then oil comes to such a pass, and he goes around telling people to be patient. I doubt if the normal, sensible person would agree with him. So you need to, as a leader, show quickly pragmatic policies that would assure the people that beside oil, there would still be some good life in other pursuits. This is a rich country. It's got fantastic lands, rich tropical forests. I don't think it's too strong in agriculture. He was talking agriculture. He was talking of physical planning. I think he needs to convince the people that even if oil is collapsing, there are other alternatives. And then his connections around the world. And I believe he's also generating a business-friendly atmosphere to attract investors to come in. Government should not be exclusively government. Government really is not designed to do business. We are now in the era of public-private partnerships, and a government that can induce investors, both local and from elsewhere, to come and put their monies here and try to add value.
Sorry about that. Lee Keping, let me come to you. We're delighted that you've made the trip from Beijing. You're vice chair. You have been vice chairman and president and chief investment officer of the CIC, the China Investment Corporation. You're now the president and chief investment officer. Picking up what President Kufuor has just said, that business of taking risk and investment, what do you see in emerging economies, not just in Africa, but largely in Africa and elsewhere, and the kind of judgments you are now making in Beijing?
Thank you. Thank you for your question. Before I answer the question, I'd like to say it's my great honor to join this panel and to come this forum. Thank you for you stay here. This is a long day, so thank you for your patience. Okay, come back to your question. I cannot answer from Beijing to talk about emerging market and the right challenge, but I, as a global investor or institutional investor, I can from my angle to answer this question. Now first, in past 20 years, emerging market have very fast growth. The proportion of economy in the world, emerging market already over 50%, roughly 57%. This is a big growth progress. Second, even include Africa in past 10 years, they have very fast economic growth. This is a very good surprise. So, therefore, from long-term point of view, I do believe the emerging market still have big potential to development in the future. Okay, come back to now. Right now, in this period, it's really from my global investor see. Emerging market right now is the most difficult time because number one, the commodity cycle changed. Number two, the capital flow. And also number three, due to federal monetary policy or maybe possible increase the rate will generate also volatility in capital flow or foreign currency. Okay, number four is also because China are the largest emerging economy. Right now, in the restructuring period, the economy slowed down. And also in China, we have to face restructuring challenge. That is need time and patience. So therefore, I think right now it's a relative low period, low cycle for emerging market. But from long-term point of view, I do believe this is still is a positive future.
Mr. Lee, let me pick up on that point because President Bongo, as I remarked earlier, did say people have got to take risks, leaders have got to take risks. But you as a banker, as an investment corporation, are surely looking for caution and stability. How do you balance the two pressures? Caution versus taking risk.
Okay, good question. But overall speaking, I absolutely agree with President Will. Okay, the key for me is diversification. Because the diversification, you can deal with the volatility in some specific region or some specific sector or some specific asset. So that is a basic model to deal with volatility in some part of crisis. Okay, second, for us, if there too much uncertainty, our strategy will become more, okay, two directions. One is a defensive. We don't want to speculate in short term as a long-term investor. Second, in this time, we do homework and focus on long-term investment opportunity or looking for long-term investment opportunity.
But even though the current state of the world is more uncertain for a whole bundle of reasons, how can you get certainty for investment in the current climate?
Actually, I can't. Because if the global everywhere is uncertainty, as an investor, I cannot get certainty. But that is based on environment. But from our global portfolio, I say defensive strategy. That means basic on diversification and also relative defensive strategy. I can get some stable or certainty.
Right, let me go to President WALESA. Like President Kufuor, who was in Ghana after the military, like Andrés PASTRANA, taking big risks with a subversion and also a major economic challenge. You, in the mid-90s, having challenged communism through martial law, you had to sit facing the communist leaders who you had been challenging. Now, how do you create that level of leadership with people you find you were actually adversaries of, but you had to find a common ground in a new situation? Help me understand the psyche there, Mr. President.
Szanowni Państwo,
Every leader has to be seen in the context of its time and of its space. You need a different leader for a bank. You need a different leader to struggle, to lead a struggle, a combat. And therefore, each leader in different circumstances requires different traits. When I was fighting against Soviet communism in my country alone, I had 200,000 Soviet troops based on the Polish territory controlling me, plus 1 million Soviet troops in the surrounding countries, plus silos with nuclear weapons. So it's a different thing when you speak of courage and calculations than in other circumstances. So if I were to become a leader, for example, of United Europe today, if someone proposed me to become one, I would first of all identify the issues of all the countries that need to be treated by Europe as integrated state, and which other issues need to be treated by respective member states. And then I would ask what should be the foundations of our integration, more left-wing or right. That is free market economy and actually values that would be acceptable but religious and non-religious people. I don't mean religious values, but values shared by everyone.
Proszę bardzo, but may I just press, you're a bit like all the young people in Africa who want change very fast. That's where you were in the 80s and the early 90s. And you were facing those who were in power, who didn't want to give things up. I'm trying to understand the mindset challenge, Mr. President.
gdybym miał być przywódcą Afryki.
If I were to be the leader of Africa, I would actually do a similar thing on those two issues. But my major idea would be how to level the standards of living among the countries, but not by one giving something to the other and the other waiting to be given. What I would do instead would be to propose such an arrangement that would benefit everyone and would not work to the disadvantage of anyone. And it is possible. Sooner or later, Africa will level the standards of living and will begin thinking in terms of the interest of the whole continent. And after that, we will be able to globalize things. Although even today, certain issues need to be treated already now globally, or otherwise we will come across crisis like, for example, the financial crisis. What did it mean to us? It told us that the banking system needs to take the global responsibility. And the question is, what will cause another crisis? Some people say there may be a fuel crisis. The others say, yeah, water will cause a new crisis in the world. So unless we identify the next crisis, we won't be able to organize ourselves and implement the challenges, but we continue thinking in terms of the old era, and although we are in a new era, we continue thinking in terms of our own state only, and that's what my revolution was. That's not what my revolution was about.
We've got 10 minutes left because we will finish at 8 o'clock, even though it's much later than expected. Let me ask all of you, if I may, about the need to communicate all of this, the way you keep the public on side in a more digitally empowered environment, given the urgency of what they expect and the limits of what politicians can deliver. Andrés Pastrana, very different to when you were in power.
That's right. We don't have Twitter. We don't have Instagram. We don't have...
Say it again, can you?
We don't have Twitter. We don't have Instagram. We don't have these social networks. But I want to tell something today here, Nick. You were talking about risk, but I think that the African leaders, they have not addressed narco-trafficking and terrorism the way they should. I remember I came to the European Parliament in the year 2000, and I came to tell the Europeans that they were going to start having a huge problem with narco-trafficking, that the market was changing from the United States to Europe. And it was simple. And we have here the best finance member in China. 1 kilo of cocaine in the camps for a farmer, he gets $1,000. That same kilo in the land strip of the jungles of Colombia cost $10,000. That same kilo of cocaine in the streets of New York cost between $30,000 to $40,000. But that same kilo in the streets of Europe or in Russia cost 100,000 euros. So that's why I was calling the attention to the Europeans saying, you're going to be the next consumers and the next market.
So your message to Africa is what?
See the figures. I went to the politician. I said, see the figures. Today, the UK is the largest consumer of cocaine per capita, more than the United States. And the second largest consumer of cocaine in the world today is Spain. So what's happening? To Africa is happening the same thing that happened to Colombia. Africa and the African countries are only transit countries. But they're starting to have the problem of terrorism, and they will start having the problem of security and corruption. And that's why the Europeans should invest more in Africa to avoid these problems of security. And second, and to finish very quickly, what is happening is, if you see that the FARC in Colombia, if you see what is happening with ISIS, if you see what's happening with Al-Qaeda, all of them are financed with the drug money. If you go, I went to Morocco the other day, the prime minister were telling me, we had a problem with Al-Qaeda here because he's financing with the drug money. Look what happened with the Taliban in Afghanistan. They are financed by the heroin. So they have to be very careful. They have to take the risk and start addressing this problem. And I think that they should do something as we did in Colombia with the United States, with the theory of co-responsibility.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yep. President Kufuor, your country is still facing new challenges. When you think of what President Obama said in Addis Ababa back in July, saying leadership in Africa in emerging economies is still not as good as it should be, given the scale of the challenges of each of the 50-plus countries. You're lucky you're not in power anymore, but you're running foundations. You are a special representative for many important issues. You must have some pretty sharp views about the scale of leadership and when it's prepared to engage on these critical issues.
Naturally. I believe that you talk good governance. Then the presumption is that you must have a good leader. Without good leadership, talk of good governance tends to be wishful thinking. And I believe it's good governance that also generates the atmosphere for real development, proper development. The truth of the matter is Africa is still in a phase in the sense that, and again it was Obama who observed when he first assumed office and came to Ghana, I believe it was 2009, April, who said what Africa needed was not strong men, but strong institutions.
And he said it again.
Yeah, well, he said it again, but he said it first time he came to Africa, in Accra. And I thought he was addressing the issue of Africa in transition still being saddled with many strong men. They are going, but they haven't gone. So I believe what he repeated in Addis the other day was just a continuation of what the warning he gave earlier. You see, now most of Africa works under constitutions that really aspire to democracy. But it's surprising that many a leader continues to hang on in spite of the constitution he swore to govern the country by, meaning leaders tend to violate the constitutions which brought them into office. This is a real challenge, and it's not easy, but I believe with more education of the citizenry, also strengthening of institutions of governance generally, and then inclusion of civil society organizations, and then the connectivity internationally, which should frown on leaders who violate the constitutions they've sworn to lead their people by. When all these things come together, quickly Africa would move out of that phase of strong men, and then accountable governance will come.
Mr. Lee, let me put the last point to you, because one of the things you did before, between 1992 and the year 2000, was you were in the State Commission for Restructuring Economic Systems. Now, China is a very different system to many emerging economies, but what did you learn in that department about the challenges of building, changing, and taking the people with you as a leader?
Thank you. Thank you for your question, but this is a very significant, large question. Okay, I try to answer that. In 1990s, I worked for State Restructuring Reform, that means Reform Commission in China. This commission is in charge to design the economic reform program. I learned a lot, and also I understand, I think I from this job to understand better or deep about China development process. Okay, I think my lesson is that number one, in building an emerging economy or building a new modern economy, number one, they should have a responsible government who has a clear target and draft clear, manageable plan. And also there a round map that is workable. This is number one. Number two, implementation should be very focused on implementation, because in any country, any society, the conflict between different departments, between central government and the local government, between different provinces, always have different interests. Implementation means you should have a coordinate mechanism to achieve the national target. Number three, I think this is in China also very important, is the people. You should protect the people, keep a burning desire to development. That is a big motivation for economic development. You have to protect. And fourth, you should be very open, because for emerging market or for developing country, you have a lot of shortage. You should be very open to attract foreign capital, foreign technology, management experience, or human resources. So a lot you should learn. You should share experience from all of the world. So you use this experience in your country. That is fifth. You have to learn common sense. Based on common sense, learn experience, and keep your target and create your own model, manageable, achievable in your country. Thank you.
Jedno zdanie proszę. Szanowni Państwo,
Ladies and gentlemen, very briefly speaking, we can say that Europe is actually hampered from developing because we have developed so much, whereas Africa can really, with its potential, open the potential of Europe. Therefore, we can help Africa develop, and I hope for that.
Dziękuję bardzo. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much.
And John Kufuor, thank you very much indeed. Can I thank you all very much indeed? Those of you who are still here, the message is 9 o'clock here tomorrow morning. Thank you.